Hello, I'm Rob and welcome to Alternatives to, where we look at an upcoming video game and suggest some alternatives that you can play in addition to or instead of it. Now, our suggestions might be obvious, or they might be left field, or depends on the game. Some you have to go a bit more left field than others, and others give you loads of alternatives and loads of opportunities, as you'll find in some of our previous videos. In this episode, we're looking at Immortals Fenyx Rising, which is developed by Ubi Soft Quebec and published by Ubi Soft. But before we go any further, we should point out that this is not a review. I repeat, this is not a review. So, Immortals Fenyx Rising. It's on all the platforms, so PS5, Switch, PS4, Xbox Series X and S, Xbox One, Google Stadia, and PC. So, what is Immortals Fenyx Rising? Well, in it you play Fenyx, a new winged demigod, and you're on a quest to save the Greek gods because of reasons. And the fate of the world is at stake, and you are the god's last hope, and you wield all sorts of things from Greek myth. You fight the Cyclops, Medusa, all sorts of things. The elephant in the room for this is not so much now, but in its original iteration. It was basically hook, line and sinker, a copycat of Zelda Breath of the Wild. They've toned that down considerably, I'd say, and in doing so I think it's not got as much of a personality. Even if the previous personality was borrowed, it still had a personality. Now it's a little bit more vanilla, a little bit more middle of the road, but I think they're making up for that with, according to a Game Informer article, at the very least, they're going to be borrowing or using a sense of humour, which they'll be owing a lot to Naked Gun and The Princess Bride, and that sort of goofy sense of humour, really. Whether they think it's goofy or not, I don't know, but that's the way I see it anyway. So my choices are largely going to be playing on that idea of humour and monsters. Yeah, so I'm going to have to kind of pull out some weird ones out of the bag here. So let's just jump into it, shall we? Number one, I was going to go with Discworld, which is from Terry Pratchett. There's a few games, but because them games are basically discontinued and the only way you play them now is through downloads, MDOS sites, this sort of thing, it didn't really feel fitting to include that. So instead, I'm going to drop in Brutal Legend. There's a lot that ties this and Immortals together. Well, it's not in the gameplay sense, more in the world design. It's a Tim Schafer game, Brutal Legend, so obviously sense of humour is going to be a big thing. It's him collaborating for the first time with Jack Black, and whether you like him or not is besides the point, but he is a comedy persona by and large. It's the game world, really. It's a mythological game world which has been bent out of shape by incorporating it in and melding it together with metal concept art and album covers and putting in a load of stars from the world of rock and heavy metal. It's also hugely underrated. I don't know whether it's the distance of time or whether it is actually the case, but yeah, I'm fancying a sequel. There's been rumours of it, but at the time anyway, it was a game which was kind of a disappointment, really, because it set itself up as being a open world action adventure, and it ended up being a tower defense game. Now, with the separation of time, open world action adventures have kind of become a little bit ten a penny, so having something, it's fundamentally open world but uses tower defense, makes it much more of a unique artifact than we felt at the time, if that makes sense. So it has all those things going for it, and it's just an incredibly cool game. But yeah, there's caveats for Brutal Legend as my number one pick. Number two choice is Toukiden 2, probably pronouncing that wrong, but this is a Japanese game with a capital anime. You play a slayer who's awakened after a 10-year slumber, the world's covered in darkness, as was in the previous game, The Age of Demons, and you've got, as one of these slayers, you've got to defeat the supernatural threat of the Oni, which is demons, devils, monsters, Japanese folklore stuff. Japanese folklore has a lot of crossover with Greek myth, so there's that connection, and also well, I think that's essentially all it really needs to be. There's so many other versions of this alternative choice that I could pick, which are basically playing the same game. And this is essentially the same game, but from Koei Tecmo, and that game has a lot more steeped in the Dynasty Warriors or Musou style. So it's interesting in that regard, and it's interesting as a deviation from the Musou style, because unlike fighting and those games where you basically fought countless thousands of people, sometimes at the same time, here you have smaller groups, but you've got to purify the monsters that you defeat. So it gives it a nice, interesting spin on a very, very traditional, probably over familiar style of game from Japan. So there's that. Warning, if you don't particularly like Japanese games, it is very anime. Not as much as a straight anime game would be, but it has like a very strong through line of anime inspirations and styles and characters and archetypes running through it. So yeah, there's that, which is both something to celebrate for some people, and for other people it's something which they might hate. So again, like Brutal Legend, it's a recommendation, it's an Alternatives 2 with caveats. And choice number three is The Messenger, indie game. This is a very interesting indie game because fundamentally it is a homage to the 2D side-scrolling Ninja Gaiden and Shinobi games, that sort of thing. But it's doing it in the modern sense of you got games that look back at the past and retool them for the present, like Shovel Knight, like Celeste, like stuff like this. So, like Guacamelee as well. So it takes the past and turns up the difficulty to be a bit more twitch in its reactions. But the story is you play a messenger, which is a member of a clan of ninja whose point is to transport a scroll across Japan to prevent the upcoming apocalypse at the hands of a series of monsters and demons and devils and skeletons and warlocks and wizards and what have you. Which is basically the same plot. It's not a particularly challenging plot, but then again, neither is Immortals. It's just, you are a guy, go and defeat some monsters. You are a girl, go and defeat some monsters. That's it. That's all it needs to be. But where its connection to Immortals comes is in that sense of humour. Essentially, it all comes from your interactions with the shopkeep, who is a mysterious guy who appears about 2 or 3 times every level. And you have conversations with him which are incredibly sardonic and play up the whole idea of the merchant or the quest giver being there just basically to tell you stuff which is relevant to you and relevant to you alone. He's a living, breathing character, and his interactions are funny, brilliant, and add a life to a character archetype who's been basically a trope, a lifeless, boring trope since the originals, really, the likes of Shinobi and Ninja Gaiden back in the classic era. But yes, this is a fun game, very funny, very original, and it's got some great boss designs. Like one I in particular liked, a little bit spoilerish, but you don't play this thing for plot spoilers. And there's one I could give away, which all of YouTube has, but I'm not gonna. But one of the bosses throughout the level, it's essentially set up as sort of an all-powerful warlock. He's got his back to you at all times, but the second you see him, he turns around and he's a tiny little guy, and he's constantly arguing with his staff, who is the evil one. The guy who is wielding the staff isn't. He's just kind of out for the hell of it. And there's another bit where it says, "Oh yeah, this is as much of a free reign as you're gonna get. You know, enjoy it while you can." It's the next level after that, actually. And make a big deal out of the fact that there isn't a boss in that. So they really play with the subvert a lot of the expectations of this type of game. So it keeps you on your toes, keeps you on the feet. And also there's a free bit of DLC that you can get with that as well. If you go on to the PlayStation Store and Xbox Store, you can get that as is. So yeah, they're the 3 alternatives too, with a big... I would also suggest Discworld, because you can play it online for free either through streaming site, because again these games have been discontinued, or downloading it to play at your own leisure like Discworld Noir. I'll provide some links in the description below. Let us know what your alternatives to Immortals Fenyx Rising are, as our choices are by no means definitive, and you could have taken this list in all manner of directions. And I also never mentioned Zelda Breath of the Wild, which is a bit too obvious, and we try to keep these lists a little more left field, so we're not recommending you games which you've already likely played, which kind of defeats the purpose of this whole concept, to be honest. But anyway, if you like this video, give us a thumbs up or a bell. And if you want to support us, check out our Patreon, the details are in the description. If you're after more video game chit chat, then please subscribe and join us every Thursday for Impossible Mission, even though the scheduling will be a bit weird with the season and Christmas upcoming. But that's all for this episode. The other Rob will be back next time with an alternative to Cyberpunk 2077. So that'll be full of fun comments. So yes, until next time, thank you for watching.
Well, where's the doorknob then? How can you have a door this big without a knob?